Welcome to the HR Empowerment Podcast, where we will uncover strategies and new insights from HR professionals who discuss up-to-date regulations, best practices, and the most pressing topics like diversity and equity, leadership, dealing with difficult situations, and much more that affect your bottom line and business. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, everybody, welcome back. Wendy Sellers here, the HR lady. I am so excited today for our guest. We have today Suzanne Lucas. She is an expert in HR, a dynamic HR trainer and speaker with decades of experience in developing and delivering engaging programs on everything from compliance and leadership to professional development. And these days, a little bit of comedy, too. So, Suzanne, welcome to the show. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much, Wendy. I'm super happy to be here.
Absolutely. Hey, tell our listeners about yourself and how you got to where you are.
Well, as you said, I am HR person. I'm the evil HR lady, and Wendy is the HR lady. So she's like the good, and I'm the bad, I guess.
Something like that. We'll just skip over that part.
Something like that. So I have, almost 30 years of HR experience.
I love that you are widely known as the evil HR lady, but you're more like shifting to the improve your HR and then sometimes the improv your HR, which we'll get to in a minute here.
Right.
You've built a huge brand around the idea that employees often see HR as evil. In your opinion, what does HR do that legitimately damages trust, and what should we do differently?
So this is a really good question because HR is not a monolith, right? There's not just one like HR god that we all get our marching orders from. But when someone has a bad experience with one HR person, they're like, all HR people are bad. No one says that about marketing. No one's like, oh my gosh, did you see that marketing campaign? I will never, ever trust a marketer again. I'm not buying any products. Like nobody does that for other things. But one bad HR person really reflects, like people think, oh gosh, they're all the same. And I think that's because so often what we do is behind the scenes. And when you have a good HR person, the employees might not really even know you exist because you're just very quietly making sure everybody's being paid according to market rates. You're solving the problems that come along. You're handling all of that stuff. And so the employees just see, wow, this is a real well-run company. What a great CEO we have.
Right.
When it's really us behind the scenes, making sure that everything is taken care of. But when something goes wrong, then it's clearly the HR person's fault. And that's not to say there aren't bad HR people. Of course there are. There's bad marketers, there's bad CEOs, there's bad operations people, there's bad call center employees, there's bad everything. But somehow we get kind of lumped in together.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And I think the biggest thing that damages trust in any role, but definitely in HR, is the lack of clear communication, right? And what clear communication means between you and me and the person over there, it's all different, isn't it?
It is all different. And there's also a lack of understanding. About once a month, I will get an email from a reader with a screenshot of a job application from the UK where it's asking all of these questions, like how much money did your parents make, blah, blah, blah. It's really invasive. And they're like, what is this? And what kind of crazy HR? And I write the person back and I'm like, this is the standard thing. It's required for certain jobs. This is not the HR person's decision. This is a government thing, right? It just depends on the region and job and all that. I don't know the details because I'm not a UK person, but I do know that. And I imagine that for every person that emails me, there are thousands that think it's some invasive HR person that's like asking, what their parents did for a living. And it's not. Right. We have so many better things to do with our time. But the government requires that for certain positions in the UK, but people don't understand that. And it's the same within the US, although on a lesser level. When you get a thing, asking for your race and gender, it's like, well, why do you need to know that? Well, because I have to do reporting on it. But people don't understand that, and often HR is the bearer of bad news. The CEO never is going to let HR people do the good stuff. It's the
Right,
bad
right. Because
stuff that we
because they
do.
want to take the credit as well. When good things happen, everybody wants to take the credit. When bad things happen, they want to place the blame, unfortunately. And that it comes back down to communication, 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 right?
Right.
You started saying about the fact that employees don't understand. I actually was reading a survey result, Survey Monkey data reported by Unleash found that 86% of HR leaders say leadership understands employees' needs. So 86% are saying, yeah, we understand what they need, but only 35% of the workers agree. And so that's like, maybe we didn't ask our workers. We asked the wrong workers, or we're listening to, a survey out from another country. And that goes back to what you were just talking about. I mean, me and you are in a different country right now. And then we were just talking about a third set of countries. There's a lot of people working across country lines now since remote. That can definitely cause a lot of miscommunication and not knowing the laws of those countries. So, super important to understand that, hey, folks, HR is not useless. So that gives me another question for you, Suzanne. You recently wrote something about whether HR is useless, and you made the point that much of HR's value is invisible until something goes wrong. How can HR professionals better explain their value without sounding defensive?
It's a really good and hard question
It
because
is.
it is really easy to be defensive on it. Well, if it weren't for me, blah, blah, blah. But because so much of what we do behind the scenes and so much of what HR professionals do is we work with the senior team and they know us. If you are an average employee who comes to work, does your job, doesn't cause any problems, you probably won't have a lot of interaction with an HR professional. You meet the recruiter when you're hired, and then when you leave, some lady you've never met does an exit interview, and that's it. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes. You don't know that there's a professional, or in a lot of businesses, a team of professionals that are looking at salaries and making sure you're being paid a market rate. You just get an increase at the end of every year. You don't know what goes into that, right? It's
Right.
it's it's all this secret stuff. And I think it can be really difficult for us because also so much of what we deal with is confidential. And
Right.
some of it is legally confidential, but a lot of it is just confidential because that's best practice. And so you may not know what happened and why something changed, or one of the things I asked a couple of weeks ago on LinkedIn is, what's a rule, a very specific rule that exists in your company? And that there's a reason for that rule. And I presented this list at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I asked the audience for more rules. And then afterwards, some woman came up to me and she's like, I really wanted to share this, but I couldn't. I couldn't say it in the group, but I want you to know. And it was, at company parties, the executive team is not allowed alcohol. The rest of the company could have alcohol, but the senior team could not. And I thought that was amazing because it's solving a very specific problem that was, you know, who knows when that problem occurred, but it was a
Yeah.
very specific problem. And so sometimes there may be rules within your company that is like, people are like, this makes no sense.
Right.
But it does make sense if you know
And
the
yeah.
backstory.
Yeah, if you're behind the scenes, the information that the employees rarely see or hear about, nor do we want them to, from compliance and risk. In this case, investigations probably were involved, and then
Right?
all the way down to manager training. It would be nice, though, folks, that if you are having very specific policies like that. At a minimum, the people that are in those roles should know without naming names, okay, this is why we have this policy, right? And it was like, oh, okay, now that makes sense. But I see so often that, talking about our theme today about, common sense and better management can fix the workplace. Well, it also includes better communication of why do we have that policies, right?
And it is also a reminder that you should evaluate your policies on a fairly regular basis because oftentimes policies are created to solve an individual person problem and then they just stay on as policies forever and ever. And that really shouldn't be the way to create policies, but a lot of companies do that, and you have very specific policies. I mean, one of the ones came up was about chewing tobacco, which thankfully in my professional career I have never had to deal with that in the office. Like
I have in construction and manufacturing environment, and so it's one of those things though that you do. Well, why were we even thinking about like, oh well, I never worked in that industry or with those type of individuals. So now we have other things that we have to deal with on a worldwide basis, including depending on where you live, things like regulations of marijuana and can we have those policies, and that's a whole other conversation. But before we get into the next question that I have here, I wanted to just kind of share a statistic. This was from Gallup. Gallup reported that global employee engagement declined for the second year in a row in 2025. So we'll see what the results are in 2026. I think you and I already know that it's still going down, but they estimated that low engagement across the world cost about $10 trillion in lost productivity. And Gallup also noted that the engagement decline was especially acute among managers. Now, my question or, statement so that we can talk about this is managers are often promoted because they were really good individual contributors, not because they know how to lead people. So what are, in your opinion, evil HR lady, what are the most common manager mistakes that create HR problems later?
Well, I do think you already hit the nail on the head with the managers don't have training. And I mean, I know this from a personal thing. The first time I was promoted into a job managing people, they're like, here is your staff. And that's it. I'm like, oh, okay, I don't know. And then they sent me to a manager training that I don't know if you remember, like there used to be like this, what color is your parachute
Yes,
or
yes.
whatever. And so they gave us that test and then they told us I was a red blue, I don't know what I was. Anyway, it was a red something. I know I was a red because like reds are strong and obnoxious. I was a red something else. Anyhow. And they went over those with us and then that was the end of the training. And that was all the management training I had. Like they didn't say, gosh, if you're a red and you have an employee who's a yellow, this is how you should act with them. No, it was just like, here you go. And this was in a Fortune 50 company. It wasn't a company that lacked money or but that was all of the management training that I received. And so often managers don't receive even that. And so they are managing people the way they were managed.
Right.
And and often they also don't realize the difference between managing a job and doing a job. And then that can make them real micromanagey because, well, golly gee, my employee isn't doing it the exact way that I would do it, so it must be wrong. There are very few jobs out there that must be done an exact way.
Right.
Those things can be done in a wide variety of ways, especially in white collar work. If you're on a factory, you need to push the button at the right time or whatever, that's going to be a different thing. But managers don't necessarily know that it's possible to have good results doing things slightly differently. And it can be really a huge problem. on
Yeah,
that. Managers
absolutely.
don't receive training. They
Right.
don't know how to manage, and they're just kind of expected to figure it out on their own. And it's a
Yeah, I
shame.
was reading your Inc. article, and in that one you specifically point out that managers often don't know what they need to do, not just about like the standard operating procedures, but all the way from accommodation requests. How do I manage performance? How do I manage performance at this company? What are the
Right?
policies at this company, not at the company I came from, or from the role that I'm in as well. So what are your thoughts on there? Like, what else do we wish, even us, you and I, when we first started in management and HR, what do we wish that we were actually trained on before they said, okay, here's your staff, have at it?
Oh my gosh, so much. And that's one of the things is accommodations. Um, because I started my career in HR analytics. And so I didn't start in an employee relations role. A lot of people will have an entry level, like a junior recruiter role is how they get into HR to begin with, and so I didn't know a lot of stuff. My degrees are in political science, so completely irrelevant, but I know how to deal with employee requests and when to say yes and when to say no. And I didn't know the ins and outs of FMLA and all that when I started. And I had resources at my fingertips because I was in an HR department with experienced HR professionals. So it was easy for me to know where to go to. But most employees don't have that. And if you've never had FMLA yourself, um,
You don't even know it exists.
you may not even know it exists. And if an employee comes to you and says, "Oh my gosh, my back is killing me. I really wish I had a standing desk." You as a compassionate manager may say, "Oh my gosh, yeah, wouldn't that be great? I wish the company provided standing desks." And then walk away, think you've been a compassionate manager, and in the meantime your employee is filing a complaint that you've ignored their ADA request.
Right.
And you didn't even recognize it as an ADA request. You were just like, oh, I was having a conversation with someone about, back pain. Gosh, I'm old now and my back hurts. And, that would be really cool. Gosh, we don't have any of those. We don't have standing desks. And,
Yeah.
and, and it's not that they're a bad manager or a bad person. It's just no one ever said, hey, if someone mentions that they need an accommodation, or they might think it's nice to have an accommodation, you need to assume that they're requesting an accommodation and start the interactive process and direct them to HR. And just a lot of managers, they don't know that. It's not because they're bad people. Why would you know? Why would you
Right,
know?
right. Why would you know that somebody's asking you for an accommodation when they didn't use the word accommodation? And then also, if you've never been trained on that, you may not even know what an accommodation means if you weren't trained on it. So I think the moral of the story is, many of the problems, that end up in the news, yeah, it might be because a manager did something wrong, but we can't blame the managers if they weren't trained. So training, training, training is so, so important, which also leads to communication and documentation. And then that whole lack of employee engagement that we were talking about earlier because of the manager who we're now pointing fingers at, unfortunately.
Exactly. And I don't think it's often the manager's fault. I mean, how are you supposed to know? Employment law is complicated. And my disclaimer whenever I get webinars is like, make sure you check with your own employment counsel. And I'm not just weaseling my way out of it. But situations are so fact specific. And when you're looking at something like the Americans with Disabilities Act, the law is a reasonable accommodation. What in the heck does that mean? It would be so much easier if it was like, if you have this condition, here's the accommodation. If you have this condition, here's the accommodation. And I'm not advocating for that for the law, by the way, because it would make no sense
Right.
because everybody's working in different things, and your disability may be the same label as mine, but because we're doing different jobs, it's different. Of course it needs to be flexible. But as a new manager, how are you supposed to know all of that stuff?
Right.
And even as an HR professional, and I feel really quite confident in a lot of these areas, but still some things come out of nowhere. And I actually saw a LinkedIn post last week, and I don't remember who said it, so I'm sorry for not
It's
giving
okay.
credit where credit is due. But it was a court case where the person had gone out on FMLA leave, and the clients that she was supporting, two of them left after her leave. And she was fired. And the question is how much obligation does the company have to continue to service this person's clients while she's on leave?
Leave. Yeah, that's a tough one.
It's really, really tough. And, from a clinical kind of a standpoint, well, of course the company is responsible. And from a revenue generating
That's what
standpoint,
I was just gonna say.
of course the company wants to. But when you go out on leave, and now we're a two-person department. It's Suzanne and Wendy, and we support together 30 clients. You have 15, I have 15. You go out on leave, suddenly I have a workload of 30. Of course, I'm going to prioritize my original 15 while
Yep.
you're on leave. Of course I am. And so then three of your biggest clients quit because you're on leave, and now they're like, it's not illogical. It's really a tough thing.
Yeah, absolutely. In that case, I mean, they should have had some kind of competent HR person in there, whether it's a consultant or internal, to say, "Hey, why so and so is out on leave for the next 4 weeks? Maybe we should get a temporary employee to help."
But even with that, there's some things temporary employees just can't do.
Yep.
You just can't. You can bring in a temp to help some of the administrative work, but you really can't ramp someone up to do high level work for a 3 week
Right.
absence. It's
Yeah,
just
and it's a big project that needs to be taken care of. And like you said, in that case, first thing I would have done is, like, if there's only two people doing this job and there's, 30, 40 clients between them, let's find out who our high maintenance clients are and make sure the experienced person that's remaining works on them. And then the temp works on the ones that aren't high maintenance and they're more administrative. It's really not that complicated, but that means you have to actually take action. And if businesses were more focused on customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, and I don't know, following the law, maybe they wouldn't lose employees, right, Suzanne?
it's
or
it's
and
highly
customers.
possible. But we speak about it in ideal terms. It's like you're eligible for FMLA when there's 50 employees. In a 50 employee company, there's often one person doing a job.
Yeah.
It can become really complex really fast. And there's so often that people don't, as you said, think through, okay, listen, we're going to be losing one of our client support people for 6 weeks. How can we organize the clients so that the priority ones get priority? And yeah, we bring in a temp. And it would be nice if companies weren't running lean, but I don't blame companies for running lean.
Right. It's
I
a
don't
it's a
blame them.
competitive, a super competitive world, worldwide, not just, statewide or countrywide anymore. I mean, it has been for a very long time, but definitely since remote and technology, and we won't even get into the conversation of AI right now, has become a regular basis in our workplace. So I have a question for you, since we're talking about, like common sense and better management. A lot of workplace problems are not legal problems at first. They are usually communication, accountability, civility, until they blow up. Where should HR draw the line between people are different and this particular behavior must be addressed?
That is such a good question, and I wish I could be like here is a chart. And this is something I'm an American. I'm very American. I sound very American. No one is ever shocked when they find out I'm an American. But I live in Switzerland, where I have lived for the past 17 years. So a long, long time I have been here, and you would think that I would have the handle on all of Swiss culture, and I don't. Um, because there's so many things that people just assume everyone knows. And when you look at a country like the United States, which is a mishmash of cultures, and we have different cultures even, from one state to another state.
Yeah.
I remember years and years ago, when I was working in big pharma, one of our HR directors took a temporary assignment to go be the head of HR at our Poland facility until they could hire someone there. So he was gone for 6 months, and he was in Poland, and we were located in Pennsylvania. And then when he got back, he took another assignment as the head of HR for our North Carolina facility. And I was chatting with him, and he's like, "Oh my gosh," he said, "the cultural differences in North Carolina were far more difficult for me than the cultural differences in Poland." And part of it was just because he went to Poland expecting this is going to be different. And he went to North Carolina saying, "I'm still in the United States."
Yeah.
But it was completely different. And so when we are looking at what are our boundaries, when do we say this is a problem versus this is cultural differences, it can be really, really hard. And I don't have a great answer other than I think it's really important to declare a company culture and to
Yes,
be very
100%.
forthcoming about what our company culture is. And our company culture is this, this, and this. And so, yes, I understand that that's not your culture and that's not your culture, but our company culture is this. And of course, you don't want to be like, well, our company culture is whatever I and headquarters like the most, right? It needs to be a really a thoughtful thing. But it needs to be stated. And
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
often we just operate on assumptions. We just assume that everybody thinks the way we think. So one of the things that's a humongous deal in Switzerland, it is such a big deal, is shaking hands. When you go into a room, you have to do the circle and shake everyone's hand. And when you leave, you better go through and shake everyone's hand. And this is true, like if you go to a back to school night with all the parents and you come in and there's 10 parents in the classroom, you better go shake every one of those parents' hands. Now, I didn't know, I don't know these people. I just come in and I sit down. And then people are like, "Oh my gosh, that American lady is so rude." And I'm like, but I wouldn't go around in an American function and shake everybody's hand. Like, just go sit down. And so a lot of those things people have in the back of their heads and they're not explicit. So, say in our company, everybody shakes everyone's hands when they come into a meeting. We're just going to
Right.
say it.
Yeah.
But nobody would say that here because why would I say that? It's so obvious. Of course, we're going to shake everyone's hand when we come in.
Yes. No, it's just such a good point, because somebody, like you said, they thought you were being rude or incivil when in fact you just didn't know the culture. So I do want to go back to addressing the fact that if our listeners don't have a clear definition of what your company culture is, starting with your mission, your vision, and I'm sure many of you heard me speak about company values so many times, it helps very clearly outline this is what we consider good behavior here, and then we're going to hold you accountable if you have behavior that's different, like toxic, gossip, sarcasm, disrespect. And so I read a statistic here that SHRM estimated workplace incivility costs U.S. organizations about $2.3 billion per day in
Holy cow.
I know, in reduced productivity and absenteeism. Because if your coworker's being incivil or what you consider rude, then, I'm going to call off maybe a little bit more, or I'm going to just be, oh, I'm here, but I'm very, very disengaged. And so it's super important to make sure, as Suzanne said, it's very clear what the company culture is. And you should probably even be making sure you're putting in your new hire orientation process, right?
I think that is really, really important because everybody makes assumptions all of the time, and you just assume that the way you do it is the way that it's done. And and that's fine if you're a company of one. But if you're not a company of one, it needs to be stated very clearly. We shake everyone's hand when we walk into a conference room. Because if I were to go to I know this now, but I didn't when I first moved here. If I were to walk into a meeting and just sit down at the table, oh my word, that is like so rude here. And it, I never shook anyone's hand in a meeting in America. Like maybe if someone knew that I hadn't met before, then sure, hi, I'm Suzanne, shake the hand. But when I was just sitting down with my coworkers who I had known for years, like of course I'm not going to shake their hand. But here, that's really rude, and so you just need to be very, very clear on what your standards are, and this in a roundabout way is a subject that I always like to harp on and people get really upset about is with dress codes. It's the same thing. And so often, anytime, and this is the truth, so you can, this is my secret. If my engagement has been low on LinkedIn, I'll post about dress codes because it really brings the engagement because people get their knickers twisted. And so many people will be like, we don't need a dress code. We just say dress appropriately. And I'm like, but in your head, when you're saying dress appropriately, you know what that means.
Right.
Or dress for your day with no other guidelines. And so then somebody shows up in, a midriff bearing shirt with their butt cheeks hanging out, and you have to have a conversation with them, and they're like, I didn't think we had a dress code. Why does this matter? And you're like, well, and there's nothing to ground you on. And we really just need to be clear
Yeah.
about things. And people don't like it because I think they feel like it's infantilizing, like, oh, I have to tell you that, your belly button rings aren't appropriate here in court, like, but somebody's got to say it and make it clear. And
Yep.
it doesn't mean that you have to have a stuffy dress code. It can just simply be, I like to say the three B's, boobs, butts, and bellies all need to be covered. And you shouldn't have any swear words on your t-shirts, like,
Yeah, you need to be clear and consistent, right?
and consistent.
Yeah, consistency is where I see a lot of people getting themselves in trouble and unfortunately even ending up in lawsuits because it's like, well, you held me accountable for the very clear policy, but you didn't hold those other three people accountable. And now it goes into maybe, gender or racial or age discrimination. And so these are the things that, in my opinion, that managers need to know about because they need to be mini HR. They don't need to know everything, but they need to know, like, okay, this is what's going to get us in trouble. And manager, this is what you're responsible for. So thankfully,
Absolutely.
thankfully you have Suzanne and myself and many of our peers who are doing manager training, and definitely leaning into Aurora Training Advantage as well. Before we wrap up here, by the way, I love that you're into comedy now, improv comedy, because you are funny, so
Thank you.
congratulations on that. How can people best connect with you?
So, you can go to my blog, which is evilhrlady.org, or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Suzanne Lucas, and I'm the Suzanne in Switzerland. Or if you're an HR professional, then you can join my Facebook group, which is Improve Your HR. And we're always happy to have new HR professionals.
But thank you so much for this. This has been informative and slightly entertaining as well. So take care, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Thanks, Suzanne.
Thanks so much, Wendy.